When you believe in lies, you become what you despise. A product of a broken system with a mechanistic vision.
Hello and welcome to episode number 34 of The Closing Track, the official podcast of AnotherAscendingLark.com, where the faith that you believe collides with the music that you love. I'm Austin, your host, and it's just me on this side of the table for once. Brett is out at the camp that must not be named, and Aaron is busy doing things with the church that he works for. So it is just me on this end this time. But there's somebody else present as well, and I'm extremely excited to have him on. I'm very, very excited to have on the former lead vocalist for Becoming the Archetype and present lead vocalist for the progressive death metal band Solomors, Jason Wisdom. Jason, thank you so much for taking time out of your crazy busy week to come on to this show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Austin. It's awesome.
I can't say enough just how much your work with Becoming the Archetype and even your work with Solomors has had an impact on me as a music fan and as a metal lover, and I know several other friends who would say the same. So thanks as a fan. Thank you for all of the amazing work that you've done and you continue to do. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Man, that's really encouraging. A lot of times it's been hard for me to remember how much the music has affected people and impacted their lives, because it's been a few years since I was in Becoming the Archetype, and the Solomors project was kind of an underground, very indie kind of thing that not a whole lot of people knew about. So it's really encouraging to hear when it does affect people's lives. I know it's made a huge impact on mine, so I'm encouraged by what God did through Becoming the Archetype in my time there as much as anybody. So
yeah, definitely. I remember when I first started getting into metal, probably back in 2009, 2010, there were 4 or 5 bands that I stumbled across, Demon Hunter, August Burns Red, and then I stumbled upon Becoming the Archetype, and I remember picking up a copy of Terminate Damnation, and I remember putting it on, and my whole world was just blown to smithereens, and nothing was ever the same again. And yeah, the rest is history. So Jason, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, what other music stuff you've done, and what your present ministry is?
Yeah, so I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago now, I stepped away from being the full-time lead vocalist and bass player for Becoming the Archetype to stay home because my wife was pregnant, and I said that I wouldn't be on the road when we had a child because she wanted to be able to stay home, be a stay-at-home mom. So I had to go back to school and finish my degree so I could get a real job, as they call it. So I went back, got a degree, became a teacher at a private Christian school, started teaching Bible, went back, got a master's degree in Christian ministry, and am currently working on a doctorate of ministry, not a PhD, a DMin. Isn't it ironic that the highest degree for a minister is called a demon? But yeah, so a doctorate of ministry in apologetics, and that's kind of my passion, is to do defending the faith. Apologetics is a big theological word for that.
Where are you getting your degree at?
It's through Columbia Evangelical Seminary, which is a online program.
Oh, okay.
Out of Washington State.
Yeah.
Really cool. So I'm doing that. I run the website becauseitstrue.com, which is a website that I write articles, create content for defending the faith on a sort of a lay level, something that's not so hard for people to understand. Try to just kind of put it in my own words, because I've been teaching middle school and high school for so long now, the past 5 years. I had a chance, like you mentioned a couple years ago, I guess it was 2013, to do a project with a former Becoming the Archetype guitar player, Alex Kinnis. Solomors was the name of the album, or name of the band project. It was a blast to get to do some music again, and I really hope that I get to do more music in the future. Right now I'm just playing music in the band at church, and writing weird progressive bass lines on my computer whenever I get a chance to sit down, and maybe that'll turn into something one day. The ministry that I'm affiliated with now, and actually stepping away from teaching, I know this is going on for a long time, but I'm stepping away from full-time teaching to go into full-time ministry with the group called RYFO, RYFO.org, RYFO.org, which is a network that seeks to serve musicians who are disconnected from their home life and from the church, and they're out on the road. Sometimes they're not out on the road. Sometimes they're local bands that have just completely unplugged from everything else that, society that we all take for granted. So RYFO seeks to reach out to them to minister to the people who are impacting society through culture and through the voices of music and entertainment. So I'm really excited to be coming on with a group that ministered to me when I was in a band, and that's meant so much to me.
So you had interacted with RYFO back when you were with BTA?
Yeah. The last couple of years that I was in BTA, we found out about RYFO, and the main thing that RYFO does is provide a network of host homes, which is places that bands can stay when they're out on the road, get food, get beds to sleep in, get laundry, places to do their laundry, showers, things like that we all take for granted, but that people out on the road very rarely get. And I think more important than that, giving them a chance to sort of reconnect to a family type atmosphere, people that they can get to know. So for us, it was huge to have friends that we could stay with every time we went through certain locations. And it completely revolutionized the way that we toured. We would schedule our tours around RYFO host homes so that we could know where we were going to stay instead of sleeping in crack houses and really weird. Sorry, Mom. We did that once or twice at least. But really weird, nasty apartments where people were being arrested in the middle of the night and stuff like that. Being able to stay with a family and stay up during the night talking, which I didn't get to do a whole lot of because I was the singer, always trying to preserve my voice
right
for the next show. But I know there were lots of great nights being able to sit up and hear conversations and have conversations with people. So RYFO was a huge impact on my life, and then really just sort of had this vision that I wanted to give back my talents, which are related to theology and teaching now. That's what I've been doing for the past 5 years, but I also have a heart for music. So becoming a part of RYFO is a natural fit.
What is your position within RYFO? What are you doing with the organization?
Yeah, my technical title is discipleship coach. That's a title that could probably be tweaked a little bit. We're working on that, but essentially I'm coming on to help create content that will be used to teach people how to be chaplains for bands, either locally or out on the road, create content that'll help host homes know how to disciple bands or to have good conversations with bands about faith, as I would call it, like just really represent clear thinking Christianity so that people know where we're coming from. And that's, like I say, tying it all together, that's my passion as well, is defending the faith and helping people answer tough questions and going deeper in what they believe. So essentially with RYFO, I'm going to come on as a person to create content to do that, but also to help sort of launch chaplaincy type programs and things like that, so we can really develop a new arm, I guess, as it were, of RYFO, where we're not just doing host homes, but we're also trying to create a new network where people can get discipled and stay connected and go deeper in their faith intentionally.
So RYFO, you were able to interact with RYFO while you were in BTA. Does RYFO have connections throughout multiple music markets, or are they only kind of known or kind of active in certain markets or certain genres where bands are touring?
We have a pretty good variety of bands that are involved with RYFO. We have 600 bands now, I believe, that have signed up.
Oh wow,
for
that's
RYFO,
awesome.
and it's always growing, and host homes always being added, but lots of different styles. I would say it tends to be indie music in whatever particular genre, because the more pop successful kind of artists are sleeping on their tour buses, and they're not really worried about getting those kinds of services that RYFO can provide. But that's one of the reasons we want to develop chaplaincy type things, and also discipleship tools, because there may be bands that are out on the road that they have a place to sleep and they have a place to eat and they have a place to do all that stuff, but they're not getting spiritually fed, and they need somewhere that they can go to, or someone they can go to for that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, we had a presence at Warped Tour last year and at several dates of Warped Tour, and we will have a presence this year again at several dates of Warped Tour. So not just one style, and it's not even just Christian bands. We're really trying to reach out to any and all musicians that are out there.
Yeah, that was my next question. Is RYFO like focusing on just Christian bands, or are they trying to any and all bands who need a place to stay or need our services?
The thing is, RYFO, I think just by the nature of the way it started, is going to be at least predominantly Christian bands, or bands that at least are open to that sort of thing, bands that are playing festivals like the now defunct Cornerstone Festival, or, other things like that, where RYFO sort of launched out from, at least in getting people's attention, because those were sort of central hubs for the Christian music scene or indie music scene. But I think as RYFO grows and as we have a greater presence at Warped Tour, and we get out, like I said, get some chaplains out into the scene, the local scene, as well as out on the road, hopefully we can spread the word of RYFO. I have a passion for discipling people who are already Christians to go deeper in their faith, because I think there's a lot of people who are just kind of really surface level, superficial believers in that sense. But I also know the desperate need, the reputation of the gospel to, as it were, get a facelift. Not the gospel doesn't need to be changed, but the reputation the gospel has in the music industry tends to be very negative. And so in that way, I have a passion for training people to sort of be more shrewd, be more clever about how they have conversations with bands and how they present the gospel in those ways. Like I say, not to change the message. I'm not looking for something new. I just think it's a cultural gap that a lot of people have had trouble bridging. And that's one of the beauties of RYFO, is that everybody that's a part of RYFO has a connection to the music industry in some way, or has a background playing music, has been in a band like myself. And so we have a unique perspective on how do we need to approach bands. There's lots of churches and lots of groups that I think over the years have thought, well, we should really reach out to musicians. And so their idea of how they would reach out to musicians was to send a pastor to the concert wearing a blazer and start handing out chick tracts or something like that. And that's how you were going to get the dirty heathen musicians to get saved. And it completely backfired. Or to say, well, here's my phone number. Call me if you ever need someone to pray for you. And the bands just immediately threw that in the garbage. So how can, like I say, so we want to reach out to non-believing bands as well, but in a way that's more creative, as it were.
You are in the music industry. What is the perception of the gospel in the music scene, especially within the metal scene? What have you seen and what have you had to deal with?
I don't think it's actually terribly different from what's going on in the world in general. The musician circles tend to be, I guess, in some ways, they're almost like prophetic voices sitting on the outside fringes of society and looking in. A lot of times they're seeing things as they're happening that other people aren't seeing. So they're more aware, but a lot of times they're also the ones who are coming up, are being, as it were, they're sort of shaped by the culture as well. It's like they're shaped by the culture and they shape the culture in a unique way. So I guess what I'm saying is I wouldn't say that the problems or the culture of the way they view it in the music industry is terribly different from the way the average 20 to 35-year-old demographic in the West views Christianity in general. I just think it's probably amplified is probably the best way to say it. You're going to have people who are more intense, more outspoken. I think musicians a lot of times tend to be very intellectual and introspective. Even if they're not intellectual, they tend to be the kind of people who spend a lot of time thinking about the injustices and the questions and the existential quandaries of life. And so in that way, the best way to answer it is, I think the church is looked down upon largely, but I think the church that they're rejecting, capital C, universal church, and the Christ that they're rejecting is largely a straw man. It's a negative picture that they have of Christianity based on stereotypes rather than on scripture. And so I think there's a lot of potential there for people who have a heart to do the dirty work, to really get their hands dirty and spend time with bands and spend time in the clubs and spend time out on the road and doing that kind of thing, but with the goal of representing Christ and leading conversations in a way that is clear thinking and good. I think there's a lot of room there for just like for instance, in the realm of philosophy, the discipline of philosophy, there's been a tremendous shift in the way theism and just belief in God and those sorts of things has changed dramatically over about the past 40 or 50 years with the advent of a lot more well-known Christian philosophers like Alvin Plantinga and William Lane Craig and people like that. There's been a tremendous shift in the way Christianity is viewed in those circles. That's not to say everybody's become Christians, but it's almost like it's become less taboo to say that you believe in God. And a lot of the obstacles have been knocked down. I think that's something I would like to see happen in the music industry, where I'm not necessarily expecting the Great Awakening to happen in the next 10 years, but I think it would be huge, the impact it would have on our culture at large, just to see the way musicians view the gospel change to where a lot of the obstacles can fall down, and Christianity has a chance to be part of the conversation again, as it were.
What are some of those obstacles that you're talking about? And as a fan, I mean, what are things not to do in interacting with the gospel with a band? What are practical things that you should avoid?
The obstacles are going to be, again, this is where I say I don't necessarily think it's terribly different, and because I don't want someone to listen to this and think, oh man, I can't relate to that because I'm not in a band and I'm not in the music scene, or I don't understand that kind of stuff. It's not terribly different from what you see all these articles on the web. Well, why are millennials leaving the church, and why are so typically the type of people who are out on the road who are in bands, I'd say the average age is going to be somewhere between 18 to 35. And that's kind of the demographic that everybody's befuddled with right now when it comes to how do we deal with them in the church. So, a lot of the obstacles are the same. There are things like a lot of times musicians feel like the church is just sort of outdated and irrelevant. And I've got my theories on why that is. And I don't think it has anything to do with doctrine. I don't think it has to do with, we need to change our doctrine. I think it has everything to do with, we have a lot of times presented tradition as doctrine, and they're rejecting the tradition. And in a certain sense, that's a good thing. So there's a lot of traditional things. The average person who's my age, especially if they grew up in the southeastern United States like I did, in the Bible Belt, probably has a bad taste in their mouth to a certain extent for what the hellfire and brimstone preaching type evangelism church, thing. And then, corny youth pastors handing out pizza and balloons and the whole thing the whole thing becomes an obstacle because it presents Christianity on the one hand as incredibly judgmental and angry and not for anything but against everything, and then at the same time incredibly shallow. And the mixture of those two, I can see why a lot of people have walked away from that. And so that's one major obstacle facing the musicians. The other thing I would say is that musicians, like I said earlier, I think they tend to be really introspective a lot of times. The creative types usually do. And so in that way, I think they're really seeking answers. They're pondering the questions. And I think, unfortunately, the church has not been great about giving answers over the past 20 or 30 years. I think that's changing. I think there's a more of an interest now in answers, but at the same time, and I'm not trying to bash anybody or anything in particular, but I think while at the same time there's sort of a renaissance of Christian philosophy and apologetics, that's happening on a really, really micro scale. Yes, it's growing, but it's still a huge minority, tiny minority of what's going on, while at the same time there's a massive explosion or renaissance, if you want to say, of charismatic belief around the world in places like Asia and Africa, and then there's the movements of the New Apostolic Reformation folks, like the Hillsongs and the Bethel Church and those groups. And like I say, I'm not throwing any of those under the bus, because I think there's lots of great things all around. But what I'm saying is, on the one hand, I'm really encouraged by the increase of interest in Christian philosophy and apologetics, and people wanting to give answers. But at the same time, I think there's a movement going on that's much bigger and much more pronounced that everybody sees, which is this sort of very charismatic, very existential, like, I can feel Jesus holding me right now kind of thing. And I think I'm just being honest. I think a lot of times the average person is going to look at that and go, well, that didn't work for me, so it's not true, which is baloney. That's not logically coherent thinking, but that's the way a lot of people think nowadays, which is, okay, well, if it doesn't work for me, then it must not be true. And so I think that's a major obstacle, is they want answers. A lot of times the church doesn't give answers. And then what can be worse sometimes is that the people who aren't giving the answers try to appeal to personal experience that the other person can't relate to. And I think it's awesome. Personal experience should be a huge part of our testimony. But I remember my life growing up in youth group, sort of just being told, like, well, if anybody ever questions your belief, you don't need to go down that road. You just tell them, Jesus saved me and I know it's true. And I'm like, man, have you ever talked to a Mormon? Because that's exactly the answer they give. Well, how do you know that Mormonism's true? Well, I'm not sure, but it just the Holy Spirit in my heart. You know what I mean? And it's like, have you ever talked to someone from another religion? I'm just saying that's an appeal that doesn't go very far. But Christianity, at least according to the Apostle Paul, 1 Corinthians 15, is based on the actual event of Jesus rising from the dead. And if it didn't happen, then Christianity is completely invalid and pitiful. So, but if it did happen, then it's true, objectively true, not just for me. It's not just a feeling. So that's where I'm coming from. And so those are the obstacles that I would love to see knocked down. So this is a long answer, and you're going to find that I give a lot of long answers. But the other part of your question was, what, as a fan, I think one of the things to realize is, as a fan, and this is going to sound really harsh to a lot of people to hear this, but the band goes up on stage and they, in a sense, they put on a mask and they're performing, and it's almost like they're being a character on stage in a certain sense. And then they come off stage, and when they're talking to fans, they don't take that mask off for the most part. So they're still in performance mode. And so you have to kind of understand that you're not typically going to get to that person by just being a fan that's walking up, because you may walk up and want to have a conversation about, reality and truth and things like that with the lead singer of the band. But at the same time, there's a guy standing behind you or a girl standing behind you who wants a picture and an autograph. And so that person's kind of got a wall up, and they're not ready to really talk to you about that. And that's why I think one of RYFO's earliest slogans, and I think it's still a really relevant one, is that RYFO wants people to become a different brand of fan. And so in that sense, it's people joining the RYFO network who are fans, but also care more about what's going on with the band than just, hey, I want to go rock out at their concert and then listen to their CD and then go home. If you really do care more about the bands, then becoming part of something like RYFO is a great way to find an avenue where, either through offering your home to bands or providing, maybe you just bring Gatorades to the concert for the bands, or you offer yourself as a person who can, hang out with them and talk with them, no strings attached. Hey, you guys ever need anyone to pray for you or anything, just let me know. I'm just, that may be a little something that the bands would balk at if they're not a Christian band. I know, as a person who was in a Christian band, we still needed to be ministered to. And there were some people who would come up and offer to pray for us and things like that. And as long as it didn't seem like they had an agenda or they wanted us to come up and pray with them right then because it would make them feel better about themselves, then it was totally cool. Like, hey, yeah, we'll come to you, man. We'd love to pray. Or, hey, man, you're the singer of a Christian band. Why don't you come over here and pray with us? And I guess what I'm saying is, a lot of times people don't realize that guy's he's not in that mode yet. And some people might think, well, that sounds really fake. Why are bands doing that? But it just kind of comes with the territory. It's the same way if you've ever tried to talk to your pastor after he preaches a sermon and you've noticed, man, he just like, it's like his eyes are kind of darting around the room, and I'm not sure he's actually talking to me right now. And, you almost need to say, hey, pastor, can we go to your office later and schedule a meeting? Because his brain has been flipped into I'm standing in front of everybody preaching mode, especially if you're like a mega church pastor, then you definitely know what I'm talking about. Um, and some people might say they hate that, but it's just a tip that a lot of fans don't realize. Um, if you can come across it to them as more genuine, hey, I'm not interested in just like, I don't have to talk to you right now. It's no big deal. I know you got a bunch of people to talk to, but maybe I can take you guys out to dinner or something. Then at that point, you might open a door where the band can get out of the venue, get out somewhere to eat. You're buying their dinner, kind of disarm them a little bit or something. And now they're willing to just talk and hang out. I don't know. Just throwing that out there.
No, those are all great things. The thing you were talking about, like the being in performance mode and putting on a mask, I remember, Jesus, has been about a year almost, when the former lead vocalist for As I Lay Dying, Tim Lambesis, was sentenced to jail, and he had that really lengthy interview come out in Alt Press magazine, where he talked about that similar thing, like the performance mode and the fakeness and the mask thing. And I remember at the time, several of my other friends who were metalheads and who listened to a lot of metal and stuff, and had this kind of, I don't want to say idolatry for Christian bands in particular, but held the Christian title maybe a little bit more strongly than they ought to have. Kind of balked at it, like you said, and they were like, well, why are these Christians, supposedly being fakes? Why are they putting on this act? And so it's interesting to hear you say that, just because I think that's something that we try to break down here on the show, and we try to show that there is nothing. The Christian title of the Christian music industry doesn't make these guys superstars. It doesn't make them these super special and more better than everybody else people. They're regular guys just like you and me, and we shouldn't hold them to this higher esteem.
At the same time, we expect them. We expect a certain thing from them, and that's why I use the example of a pastor. I mean, a pastor doesn't talk from the pulpit typically the same way he talks one-on-one with somebody. There's almost like and it's cheesy, but there's almost like a pastor voice. I mean, if Billy Graham carried on conversation with his family at the dinner table the way he does in front of 15,000 people in a stadium, then it would be ridiculous. So he's definitely got a performance element there, but I think people don't question that because well, he's just preaching the gospel. But then if you're a band up on stage and you're kind of in performance mode, they look at you like, well, man, that's really fake. And I think the problem is I think we draw artificial lines a lot of times in that we want to split things up. So we want to say, well, you're not really doing ministry, or you're not really a Christian band doing what you're supposed to do, except for those moments when you stop in the middle of your set and preach. The rest of the time, you're just doing this worldly like music thing. But we wouldn't go up to any businessman in his office and be like, hey man, why aren't you preaching right now? You're really wasting all your time. You know what I mean? We would say, are you representing Christ in what you're doing, as you're doing it? And so in that way, I think, if the performance thing is part of the package, and I think it is a lot of time. I mean, some bands are more down to earth seeming than others. Obviously there's bands out there that really go, to the point of wearing masks like Slipknot or somebody, but at the same time, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's part of what they're doing. It's part of their craft, as it were. And so I think some bands do it really, really well. Josh Goggin, who was in the Chariot, and Norma Jean before that. I mean, we got to tour with the Chariot in Europe. I mean, he didn't slam guitars around on the tour bus and set things on fire, because that would have been really annoying, and really damaging and really expensive. But when he's on stage, he slams guitars around and sets things on fire, because that's part of his performance. But that's also awesome, and that's what you want him to do. And if somebody said, well, that's just awful, and that's just destruction, and there's nothing good from that. I mean, I would say, well, you never got to hang out with them, and you don't know, you haven't read their lyrics, and you don't know what his heart is and stuff like that, because I think they're doing it all, even the setting stuff on fire for the glory of God. So
setting guitars on fire for the glory of God. I like it.
Yes.
That's fantastic. How did your study in philosophy and apologetics how did that play into your time with becoming the Archetype and Solomors? How did that influence your work as a band and things you did on tour? How did that play a part?
I didn't really get into my formal studies until after I'd left becoming the Archetype, but I had always been interested in reading and learning, stuff. So a lot of the early, Terminate Damnation, the lyrics to that, you'll notice if you read are very, I don't know, they're a lot more elementary if you want to take it that way. Physics of Fire was a little more conceptual, a little bit more of my theology going on there. Dichotomy got more so, and then by the time we got around to Celestial Completion, the record, I really wanted to say a lot of things, and was kind of fed up with the whole, even to a certain extent, some of the stuff that we had done in the past, if that makes it. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it, but there was a certain sense in which with Celestial Completion, I wanted to write lyrics that were really positive and not so focused on destruction and fire and Armageddon, and which is funny because the first song is about the end of the world, but at the same time it's supposed to be like a really uplifting kind of spin on it. So it's like we're playing happy progressive death metal, but that wasn't my goal. My goal was, I thought, well, I just want to say something else. I want to say something other than let's crush the devil and hooray for Armageddon, and so a lot of that's sort of shown through in the lyrics to Celestial Completion. Solomors was a concept record, so from the beginning of the record to the end is sort of the progression of a person living in sin, living in deception and depravity, and being lost, and then slowly moving from there to a place of their faith beginning to infect the people around them. And so you can see a progression. There are times with some of our records where I think everybody's been convinced that Jason's a 5-point Calvinist, and which I know that's a question you'll want to ask probably at some point, and there's been other times when it doesn't sound like that, and so I don't use this kind of language a lot, but I guess it probably fits in this case. You kind of can see a little bit of my spiritual journey, or my spiritual growth, or whatever you want to say, in some of those lyrics. But it's also to a certain extent, it's some of the growth as an artist. The lyrics to Terminate Damnation were the first lyrics I ever wrote that got recorded for a big record label. We did an album before becoming the Archetype when we were called The Remnant, and those lyrics are even a step further back from there, probably creatively and theologically.
Interesting. I had no idea that Depravity's Demise was a concept album. I'll have to go back and reread those lyrics and try to pick up on that.
The first song is Standing in Air, which is about sort of an indictment of the person who thinks that they know everything and they've got everything right, but then they look down and realize they're standing in air. They're not. Their feet are planted in the air rather than on solid ground, and then so it's sort of an indictment of that emptiness of that. But then it slowly transitions from song to song to the point of the very last song is what's the last one? I'm trying to remember what it's called. Calling Down the Sky, which the chorus is all about. We will move in one accord and raise our voices like a sword. So that at that point, the person's sort of become a part of the global church, universal, and is, making a difference for Christ across the world, infecting the lives of the people around them. So, and the transition point in the record is sort of the Dwarf Lord chorus song, as we called it, the weird song on the
Following the Light.
Yeah. Anyway, the middle that song is all about it's not safe, but it's essential to find your way. You must go, and it's all about sort of the transition point when he's following Christ, beginning to follow Christ, and realizing it's not safe, but it's it's the thing. So anyway, yeah, it is a concept album, but it was kind of subtle.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Is it true that Standing in Air is a play on words from a book by Greg Koukl and Francis Beckwith?
There's a book by Greg Koukl and Francis Beckwith called Feet Firmly Planted in Midair, I think. Yeah, I basically used that idea, which is a great book. I read it at least once a few years ago. So
yeah, that was nagging at the back of my mind when I first heard that. I was like, this song is about like relativism, and it's talking about standing in air. I wonder if maybe if I get to talk with him someday, I'll ask him that. major life question answered. But no, you mentioned earlier about 5-point Calvinism, whatever. How has your interaction with Reformed theology been a part of becoming the Archetype? And some fans consider BTA and Solomors to be just one of a handful of Reformed metal bands. Is that an accurate assessment, or is that kind of overblown?
I would probably rather let Seth Hecox answer that question, because Seth would probably say, well, if that's how you want to take it, then that's good. Take it that way. And that's probably, for this question, that's the right answer, which is, if people read the lyrics to any of those records and they really, it really edifies their position in Reformed theology, then I say more power to that. But at the same time, there have been times when I think I have definitely been much more Reformed in my soteriology, big word for my doctrine of salvation. But I'm not necessarily, I definitely am not a Calvinist now. And I probably haven't been for a few years. And I don't know that at any point, if anybody had come up to, other than when we went to a Presbyterian church, when I felt like, since I was part of a confessional community, I probably would have, if somebody said, well, are you a 5-point Calvinist? I would have been like, yes. Otherwise, it's just always been sort of a, I'm convinced the Bible teaches that God is completely sovereign. And yet at the same time, I am also completely convinced the Bible teaches that man is responsible. And Calvinism, Reformed theology, however anybody wants to spin it, I think is beautiful in its focus on God as sovereign King of the universe, first and foremost. And so I really value that. And a lot of there's even a song on celestial completion that, I'm sure a lot of folks would see, like if you're careful to listen to the lyrics, there's a song on there that's pretty much straight up from the battle of analogies, if that's a way I could put it, which is a lot of times what people will do when they're trying to illustrate the difference between Calvinism and Arminianism is they'll say, well, Arminianism is like you're drowning and Jesus throws you a life preserver. And Calvinism says, no, you're not drowning and you need a life preserver. You're dead at the bottom of the ocean, and God revives you. Well, there's actually a song on celestial completion that literally says that. Basically, it's a 3-song story, basically about a person who's dead at the bottom of the ocean, and then like this arm reaches down and picks them up and scoops them up and breathes this new life into them and gives them. So in that sense, I'm sure there's a lot of folks who would totally read into that the irresistible grace and sort of thing. And and maybe I'm more Reformed than I am not. But I don't know. It's just one of those things where I tend to be probably more in the middle. So I'll lay that out there for everybody. If it disappoints anybody, I'm sorry. I think the fundamental difference between, as I've tried to study it more and get to know people from other sides, because I love to be challenged by people who disagree with me. And there have been times when I've probably been extremely Calvinistic, and then there have been other times when I wasn't. I would say I feel like the fundamental difference doesn't come down to free will, and it doesn't come down to predestination, election, as much as it comes down to the view of what is preeminent in God's character. And that is to say, I think in Calvinism, God's sovereignty as king is preeminent. And so everything sort of is colored by his kingship, as it were. So as a Calvinist, and at times when I was more Calvinistic, I would probably say, well, I'm going to understand the way that God loves based on his kingship, because that should not be sacrificed. We have to focus on his kingship first and foremost, because he is the sovereign of the universe. And there's lots of Bible verses that I can use to back up that point of view. Nebuchadnezzar, when he's been wandering around as a beast, looks up at the heavens, afterwards repents and basically says, no one can stop what God wants to do. The humans are the men in the world are just like dust in his hand, kind of thing. So, but then I would say the Arminian position tends to be that God's love is preeminent, and that colors everything. So his kingship, will be colored by his love rather than his love being colored by his kingship. And so in that way, I tend to fall in the middle and say that I don't think one's supposed to come before the other necessarily. So I value both sides, and I'm still kind of just, maybe I'll write a real awesome concept record next time, and it'll edify all of my Armenian friends. And then I can do an album. I can do an album after that, and it'll make all my Calvinist friends happy, and it'll just confuse the heck out of everybody else. So I don't think there's going to be. You've probably heard that joke about the two lines in heaven, the Calvinist line and the Arminian line, and the guy gets up there, right? I don't think there's going to be two lines, and so I'm not terribly worried about that. I've given that answer a couple times in a couple different podcasts, and I think it surprised a few people, because I think they all expected me to be like, well, Jason's got a beard, and so he's got to be Reformed. He's got to be Calvinist. I mean, I read his lyrics, and he totally backs up what I believe. And I guess what I would want to say is, insofar as what I think Calvinists believe is biblical, then yeah, I totally back that up. And insofar as what they believe may not settle with me, I don't really address that. So, I'm not going to write a record about any philosophical issues I see with Calvinism, because that would be a really boring lyrical record. So
that'd be a hard record to write, like, and write engaging lyrics.
I could do it. Maybe I'll do a concept record the first 5 songs will be all of the reasons I don't like Arminianism, and the last 5 songs will be all about the reasons I don't like Calvinism. And then I'll have like a weird instrumental in the middle that'll be dedicated to Molinism, something like that.
Get William Lane Craig to do a monologue on that track.
Yeah, I'll just loop some William Lane Craig things on middle knowledge in the background. I'll put them in like a really weird voice though, so they sound metal and brutal.
That would be hilarious. That would actually be really, really funny. I would love to hear this.
I call it the Metalhead's Compendium to Philosophy of Soteriology or something like that.
That is awesome. Anyway. Is there any more plans for Solomors in the works right now, or are you like talking about the actual next Solomors album as this dual, contra Calvinism, contra Arminianism thing? Is this like a teaser in the works?
No. Well, I don't have any, like, I really, when it comes to lyric writing, I really have to be inspired. I've been working on some songs with some friends, and I have not been able to come up with any lyrics. We've got a lot of music, but then I haven't been able to come up with any lyrics. And I'm just not there yet. But then with Solomors, when Alex sent me some of the music for it, I cranked out 10 songs worth of lyrics in about a week. So it just totally depends on the moment. And so when it happens, I'm not planning like, hey, this record's going to be the one where I really say this. I mean, sometimes I probably need to think more about it than I do. For instance, on the song Self-Existent on Dichotomy, there is like a absolute blatant heresy in that song that we discovered after the album was mastered. And we're like, oh man. And then I was like, what? Oh, because, okay. So
a man buried but never dead.
Yeah. So long story short, the lyric says, he stood there before me, a man buried but never dead. Well, here's the thing. Every song on Dichotomy has, this is the explanation, okay? But then I'm going to just admit to the fact that it's a heresy. The explanation for why it happened is this. The album's called Dichotomy. Every song has 2 names. A lot of people didn't pay attention to that, but every song has 2 names. So I forget which one Self-Existent is also called, but like Artificial Immortality, I believe, is also called The Lion. Every song has 2 names, and every song actually has sort of 2 sources that I'm pulling from. And so the song is lyrically pulled from the 3rd book in C.S. Lewis's space trilogy called That Hideous Strength. So here's where the conundrum occurred. It's supposed to be at the same time a song about Jesus, and here's the corny, annoying, nerdy part. If you haven't read the book, it's at the same time it's a song about Jesus, but it's also a song about Merlin, who is in the 3rd book, and Merlin's sort of like the Christ figure of the book. And so where I screwed up is that I yanked a quote directly from the C.S. Lewis, which is like the most intense lyric or not lyric, but line in the whole book to me, which was when he said, "And he stood there before me, a man buried but never dead." Speaking of Merlin, the great arch magician. The problem is I didn't realize that putting that line in there, which sounds awesome, when you flip it to the other side and and everybody knows you're talking about Jesus. Oh crap! Now I just said that Jesus never died, which is blatant, terrible heresy, and I go hang out with the Muslims now because Jesus only appeared to die, which is what the Muslims believe, for those who don't understand what I'm saying. But so yeah, that's not what I intended to say. Didn't mean to say that. And oops, now it is forever enshrined on my favorite Becoming the Archetype record, is Dichotomy. I know a lot of people are partial to Terminate Damnation. And I like that one a lot too. I like all of our records, but as just a fan of metal, being able to record with Devin Townsend on Dichotomy and everything he did to that record, to me, it's just, I can enjoy it as a fan of music in a non-selfish pat on the back kind of way. Because when I listen to it, I'm like, wow, how did Devin get it to sound like that?
What was working with him like?
It was cool. He's a unique character. And he had a lot of good questions, a lot of good challenges. I would love to talk to him now, because at that time, like I say, I hadn't really gotten into my philosophical and theological studies. So a lot of the questions he had, and this goes to what I'm saying about wanting to create content to help people know how to have better conversations. I wish I had known how to have better conversations with somebody like Devin Townsend, who is not a believer, but is a very spiritual person, in the sense that he's really interested in like new age kind of things and infinity and energies and the wavelengths and those kinds of things. Well, I didn't know anything about that kind of stuff. But if I had, I think our conversations might have gone differently. I mean, I don't know that it would have been anything tremendously different, but I like to think that, I'm sure this isn't the case at all, and Devin will never hear this, but I like to think the fact that we recorded a record with him that was really, really heavy, but wasn't negative, played a part in his getting back into heavy music. Because when we were in the studio with him, he had stepped away from doing heavy music. He'd quit Strapping Young Lad. And one of the things he questioned about heavy music was, when he was in Strapping Young Lad, it was all about destruction and chaos and hate and anger and drugs. And that was what it was to him. So he was really he didn't understand, why are you coming in here as believers and playing this angry sounding, hateful sounding, destructive, chaotic sounding music that I associate only with terrible things. I mean, like I say, I like to think that him working on our record and realizing it didn't have to be negative played a part, because it wasn't, I think it was like a year after that he recorded the album Addicted. It's a great album, but it was heavier than stuff he had done before with Devin Townsend Project. And then he did the record after that, or he did two records at the same time, but one of them was really heavy. I can't remember what it was called, but after that. So anyway, he's awesome. I love everything he does. He definitely played a huge role in influencing my thoughts when we came to writing Celestial Completion, because at that point I was like, I want to write a really positive sounding metal record,
Do you think maybe for the next Solomor's project you might try to hit him up again if you've got the means to do so?
Well, Solomor's, I don't know. Solomor's is Alex's project, and Alex lives in Philadelphia. And if Alex writes some more songs and wants me to do vocals on them, then I would love to do it. But it's just one of those things. So it's not to say that Solomor's won't ever do anything else. But I don't know. It was just kind of he sent me the songs, and we've crowdfunded the record and did it. And it'd be cool to do it again. Other than that, I mean, I guess I can say that I've been writing music with John Starr and Brent Duckett, which is Duck and John, who were the original drummer and lead guitar player from Becoming the Archetype. We've been writing some songs together. We don't know. That's when I was telling you earlier, I'm writing some songs with friends, but can't come up with any lyrics. We're not writing it to be a project. We're not writing it to be an album. We're just writing songs because we still want to write songs. And I'm writing songs every once in a while when I can just sit down and record stuff with the guitar or whatever. So, maybe at some point there'll be a another BTA record, and it'll be with original Terminate Damnation members. That would be something I would definitely love to do. But I can't say with any certainty when or if that will happen, but that would be a cool idea.
That would definitely be awesome. Well, Jason, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I got a million more questions for you, but we're already going longer than what I said. So thank you again for taking time for coming on the show. I super enjoyed talking with you and hearing about your ministry. What are ways that going back to RYFO, how can people get a hold of the ministry and how can they help out? What can they do?
If you go to ryfo.org, just ryfo.org, there's all the information there you would need to know how you can help out if you want to become a host home, or if you want to just help out bands in any way that they need help. RYFO is a nonprofit organization that I work for. So when I step away from my full-time job at the church, we'll be doing so on faith that God is going to lead people to us and lead us to people who have hearts for the musician community and want to see my gifts used and my story used in that way that can help partner with us financially. So if you go to my website, becauseitstrue.com/donate, there's all the information on there for how you can donate to my ministry. And anything helps. We need people who can do as little as give $100 one time or $10 a month, or we need people who can fund things like I'm sitting in my camper right now, which my wife and I bought because we want to go to music festivals and be there for bands as chaplains, and also maybe cook food for bands and help them out. So anything people can do to help us out in our ministry going forward. But also, like I say, if you go to ryfo.org, you can get all the information there about how to help them out and how to just support the ministry in general. So
awesome. ryfo.org. Yeah, I'll definitely be seeing what I can do.
Stands for Rock Your Face Off.
Does it really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's
a great acronym. That's a great acronym. That is a fantastic acronym. Well, Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show. I definitely hope that at some point down the road you're able to come back on again and update us on your ministry, update us on your music, and update us on anything that you might want to talk about. You're welcome on the show anytime, and thank you for your time tonight.
Sounds awesome. Thanks, man.
If you want to contact us, you can find us on Facebook at anotheraascendinglark.com. You can find us on Twitter by searching AALblog. You can send us an email at anotheraascendinglark@gmail.com, and you can visit the brand new anotheraascendinglark.com, where we've got some more changes rolling out to give you a better experience. Next week we'll have a normal show with Aaron and I. Don't know what we're going to talk about, but I think the new Alabama Shakes album and the new Haste the Day album might be on tap for some discussion there. And so follow us on Twitter, share the show, let us know what you want us to talk about, and we'll got some great shows planned for you in the future. Thanks for listening, and you guys have a wonderful week.